What's up? I was going to do a fragrance review today, but I decided to postpone that until maybe tomorrow. I want to talk about something else. It's more of a topic than a fragrance review. And the reason I want to talk about this is because um, over the last few years, I've noticed a lot of fragrance reviewers trash reformulations. And sometimes I agree with them, but most of the time I disagree with them, because I think a lot of reformulations are actually better than vintage and first generation batches. Um, I have an example of one reformulation that's not as good as vintage. I have a lot of examples. Brut Cologne, this is not the aftershave, this is the cologne. I think the vintage and the 1970s and 1980s batches of Brut Cologne were so much better than they are now. I remember wearing these Brut Cologne and Brut Aftershave back in the 70s and 80s. And I remember them being so much better back then in quality and just the way they smell and performance and every way. They were way better back then than they are now. These Brut Colognes, especially the original, are still wearable, but they, after so many reformulations, they're just a lot more synthetic now than they used to be. Back in the 70s and 80s, this used to be so beautiful, and now it's just like, it's still okay, but it's just not the same as it used to be. There are some reformulations versus vintage fragrances that I think are exactly the same. And I have three examples. Cool Water, Reef Gauche Pour Homme. This is actually the La Collection Reef Gauche Pour Homme. And Paul Sebastian. I have the reformulations, and I remember the original batches. These three are exactly the same thing. I started wearing this Paul Sebastian back in 1982, and I remembered the way it smelled. I wore this throughout the 80s. This is, I think, 5 or 6 years old, this one. This smells exactly the way it did back in 1982, along with these other three, the Reef Gauche and Cool Water. They are exactly the same thing. To me, they smell now as they did back when they were first launched. Angel Men, this is 2020. This is a 2020 batch. This is so much better. I have a 2001 batch, and it's unwearable to me. I hate it. I can't stand to wear it because that tar note is so strong, it ruins the whole composition. It ruins the whole fragrance because you get nothing but tar note for like 2 or 3 hours, and it's just nasty to me. That's the 2001 batch I have. This is 2020 batch. This is absolutely beautiful. I can wear this every day. I like to wear this for bed actually because it still has that same original DNA from 1996, and it still has that tar note, but they brought that tar note way down, and it's so much more pleasant now. I'm going to lump these next four all together because what I have to say about them is exactly the same thing. Witness by Jacques Bogart. Halston 112 along with Halston Z14. Azzaro Pour Homme. And Polo, the original. What I have to say about this, I have to say about the other three, so I'm just going to lump them all together. I wore these back in the day, back in like late 70s, early 80s. I couldn't wear a lot of them because they were too strong and they were too powerful, basically. So I couldn't wear these all the time, but I remember being around them. A lot of people wore these back in the late 70s and early 80s, and I remember a lot of people wearing these, and I thought it was way overkill. I thought it was just too strong. Projection was too much. It would choke people out. And I love this fragrance. It's just I couldn't wear it because I would choke myself out because it was just too strong. But I have all the reformulations, and I think all the reformulations of all these are so much better because they tweaked the formulation. They made it a lot more wearable. All four of these are a lot more well-rounded and just smell so much better than the vintage. So I love to wear these. I couldn't wear a lot of these back in the day because they were just too strong and too raw and too intrusive, and it would choke everybody out, which is not nice. I don't like to wear fragrances like that myself. So the reason that I'm making this video is just to say, don't believe everything you hear. Don't automatically believe vintage is better than reformulations because in my personal experience, a lot of reformulations are much better than the vintage and the first generation batches by far. A lot of these fragrances are so much more wearable now and so much more beautiful to smell for me and for everybody else around me. So don't automatically believe vintage is better. And it upsets me a little bit because people automatically believe reformulations are crap. That's what a lot of fragrance reviewers are saying. A lot of fragrance reviewers are saying reformulations are watered down. They ruined them. They're a shell of what they used to be. And I disagree with that. As far as like the majority of reformulations, I think are much better than vintage. And people are believing vintage is so much more better. So they're going out to eBay and spending hundreds of dollars on fragrances that they haven't even smelled the reformulation yet. They just automatically assume that vintage is better, and they're going to spend 4 times as much money buying vintage than buying something that's actually better as far as the reformulation. And I just wanted to come on here and give my opinion about it because sometimes vintage sucks and sometimes reformulations are much better. So I just wanted to get on here and say that. As a matter of fact, let me know if you have experience with a particular fragrance or fragrances that you think the reformulation is better than the vintage. Let me know down in the comment section. And stay tuned tomorrow because I actually think that I'm going to review this tomorrow. This is Halston 112. It's been a long time since I talked about this, so I think I'll talk about this tomorrow. Anyway, I love you guys, and I will talk to you maybe tomorrow. See ya.